want to try and speak against anger, and I want to speak for sadness, for human sorrow. But all the catastrophe of the Gaza massacre, it's our responsibility and need to face it, and hold it, and to cradle it, carefully, very carefully. Remaining sensitive and alive to so much death and pain and chaos is not easy. We must speak out. There is much to be said, and there is much to be felt, and there are many things to be done, and these things must be fulfilled. But there is also a place for silence. A place for silence in this, and a very deep sadness. And it is important to find a place for these qualities, because in this silence, in this sorrow and compassion, the suffering in our hearts and minds for the suffering of others is a truth and a vitality upon which we can depend and use and do what must be done. This is the dimension within each and every one of us from where morality and conscience and honour arise. The justice of civil society and its promise of peace does not come from law books. It is only enshrined there. It comes originally and continuously from the human heart. It is your heart that brings you here today. Without this raw morality of the heart, there can be no sanity, and no prosperity, and no justice. At the end of the day, and in the silence and in the darkness, the greatest truth and wisdom essential for our survival is found in our hearts. Who can deny it? I am not talking about the so-called moral high ground. The concept is always an irrelevant distraction. I am talking about something much deeper, perhaps a more difficult and lonely place, but in spite of this, it is ultimately the only secure ground we will find in this world. It is sacred ground. The man-made horrors of the modern world are produced two at a time. They come in pairs. One heartache is quickly followed by another. It is always a double disaster. Firstly, there is the initial atrocity in all its blunt, shocking and sickening reality. Then there is the second tragedy. This is the tragedy of lies and appalling justifications produced to legitimise and make normal the terrible crime that has taken place. We commonly find this second tragedy in the media and in the mouths of political leaders. The first horror makes us aghast, and it shocks and saddens us. The second horror, the horror of lies and deceit and self-deceit, of moral cowardice, and the stupidity of ruthless, narrow self-interest, these horrors throw us into despair and utter dismay, and our moral universe is challenged and comes under siege. Such is the case with the massacre in Gaza. In this awful obscenity, we have been asked to overrule our feelings, our intelligence, and all decency, and to accept the necessity of cruelty and the old lie that might is right and that military violence will bring sanity, justice, and resolution. We are pressured to abandon our moral instinct that tells us that murder is wrong. Not only is this an unbearable pressure for us, it is also impossible to submit to. Humanity is a fragile ecosystem, and there are laws of human nature and conduct that are broken at our peril. Our moral compass is vital, not just for our survival, but also for the survival of the planet. We cannot allow our moral world and our conscience to be wiped off the map. Our Prime Minister and our Deputy Prime Minister, by example and implication, have asked us to abandon conscience on the issue of the Gaza massacre and to submit to the idea that this crime against humanity is somehow appropriate. To many Australians, this is a most perplexing and disillusioning shock. I thought that Australians were supposed to stick up for the underdog, but the Prime Minister and his deputy seem to be saying in this case that we should stick it up the underdog. It's a deplorable failure of leadership and is akin to the weakness and corruption of governments who use militarism to solve problems.
Exactly.
To cover their ineptitude or disguise their poverty of spirit and loss of intelligent imagination.
Well done, well said.
I would not be speaking here today if my Prime Minister or the Deputy Prime Minister had spoken inclusively for all Australians, as they often claim to do, on this difficult and vital question. Regardless of the complex history and the infinite arguments and minute details of the endless story of who did what to whom in the Middle East, we can see clearly the shape of this action in Gaza and know that it is wrong and disastrous. We can see an abomination. We can feel revulsion. We witness massive human suffering inflicted on the Palestinian people in the most cowardly and brutal way. It is not a war, it is a cold-blooded violent crime, and one cannot help but sense something psychotic in it.
It's a crime.
There are those who say we are not qualified to understand because we are so far removed across the world. But I would say that's the very reason why we can see the essential shape of it so clearly. How the government of Israel could inflict this sickness and shame on its own people is in itself a very sad question. We must feel sad for Israelis and the future of Israel also. This harms them very much. I will now finish by simply stating my belief that the healing of this terrible situation lies in the human capacity for sadness. Let us take what reasonable actions we can to make peace in the world, but let it arise from the dignity and strength of sorrow, rather than from the force and confusion of anger. Thank you. Go well.